Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 35 of the Beer Enthusiasts. It's been a while. I think the last time we were very shortly after we had taken the master exam, and we're back. We got our results, and so we thought we'd do another follow-up episode. Now that unfortunately we've gone through the many stages of grief. So yeah, if you don't follow us on other on social media or follow our individual accounts, yeah, we didn't pass. So
Yeah, we'll go ahead and rip the Band-Aid and let
yeah.
everyone know that this is a sad episode.
Yeah, exactly. And not only did we not pass, nobody did.
Nobody.
So, and I would venture to say that we are, with Chris's kind of, definitely takes the lead on this, but we definitely know a lot more, I would say, about the history of the master exam than like your average Cicerone layperson. Obviously, Ray Daniels knows a ton, and people like Chris Pisney and people who've worked for Cicerone for a long time. But just people who are clearly on the outside, Chris has listened to other podcast episodes and read articles, and and he's forwarded them to me in many cases. And whenever we see, somebody who's a Master Cicerone who does, an interview of some kind, we're usually pretty interested. And from what we can tell, then I think you got some confirmation. This was only happened really one other time where nobody passed that we know of.
Yeah, I have a document that's basically the shed from A Beautiful Mind that's just like putting everything together about the history of the Master Cicerone exam and I talked to some a Master Cicerone and sort of confirmed it by as much as we know that this is only the second time that not a single person has passed. Definitely true in a year's time. There were some like strange years where they had multiple exams, either to like catch up from pandemic backlog or whatever it may be, and things like that, where maybe somebody didn't pass like the spring version, but somebody passed the fall version. But there's only been 2 years for sure, I think, where nobody passed. So
Yeah.
we're making history at least.
Yeah, it's not good when you're thinking, because one thing that did happen was it definitely took, from what we could tell from when people had posted and kind of announced like how they did, and when Cicerone posted last year about or I guess 2 years ago now, we're in 2025, but when the six people had passed, this seemed like a little bit of a longer wait for us. I think we ended up like right at about like 9 or 10 weeks for results. So there was definitely a part where it was like maybe some people got close, because we've kind of heard in the past they'll do a kind of second look at people's exams if they are kind of close. They just want to kind of really make sure, if they're going to give somebody an 84, they really want it to be an 84 and not kind of miss something, which is totally understandable. And I was, thinking about joking about asking, the owners of Cicerone, if it took that long, because they were shocked that nobody,
Yeah.
and they were like, "Did this really happen? That
Did
nobody?" But
everyone do this poorly?
yeah, did
Is that
everybody?
what's...
Yeah, yeah, and not everybody has revealed their exact score, but I think there's maybe only one or two people who we don't know the exact number, and besides those two holdouts, we're not even sure anybody broke 80. In fact, so whatever that means, that's going to mean something, very different to, each individual exam taker. And we'll definitely kind of get into our scores and kind of talk about why, we think we kind of landed where we did. And then hopefully talk about some things that we were, maybe surprised us about the exam. And, now that we can kind of actually put it together, like with some feedback, and actually give it some context. We had a lot of kind of things that we had inklings about, or maybe we had a gut feeling about when we had taken the exam, and kind of how we thought we did. But now we have kind of a clearer picture, and we can kind of get into that. But did you bring anything to drink? I definitely
I was
brought.
just going to ask you. I was asking if you're partaking.
Yeah, yeah,
I brought a beer from a young upstart California brewery. Um,
yeah,
yeah, they're dipping their toes into the double IPA waters. Hopefully, it's good.
yeah. So
Uh,
yeah, I
if you're
got.
just listening, I'm pouring Pliny the Elder, which is still to this day an all time favorite.
Yeah, yeah. I just had a. I like you said, I knew this wasn't going to be. It's not a celebratory episode, and so it's. I guess smoked beer would be something I'd drink one way or the other, but can't go wrong
Yeah.
with Schlenkerla, and this is their cherry wood smoked root beer. So
Well, so I think it's definitely worth just reminding people how the exam breakdown is, not in terms of everything that's on it, but they're very upfront about what components of the exam are worth what percentage of the overall score. And there's a whole table breakdown on the website. They do this for every level. So if you're curious about what really counts in terms of points, make sure you're on the right page for certification for the level that you're going for. And they really break it down. And that helped us or hurt us psychologically in one way, which is we like went over our scores a million times because the basic breakdown is 57% of your overall score is on the written, and the written is just 16 essay questions. And then 28% of your overall score is the oral exams, and there are 12 of those, comprising that kind of 28%. And then the remainder, 15%, is the tasting. And so that's like one initial hurdle to get over is that the tasting is just not worth that much. You still have to do well on everything basically, and we'll get into that. I think just sort of like approach wise and philosophically, but I think the tasting is the most interesting thing for people to hear about, and it's stuff that they, like doing. People like practicing tasting and learning about that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, the bulk of your points are coming from the other 2/3 of the exam, and so while there's not a lot of wiggle room on the exam to do poorly on some things, the master level is a level that there's no minimum on a section required. You just have to get an 85% overall. That can add up to 85 or better, no matter or any which way, right? You could make up the points on any section of the exam, whereas other sections of or other levels of Cicerone, they have a minimum score that you have to get on the tasting. Now there's like a practical minimum, right? You can't dig yourself such a hole on the tasting that you'd need 100 on everything else in order to pass, because they're just not handing out 100 on basically anything on the master exam. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the breakdown. And I put together a little like Excel sheet that we could crunch the numbers every which way to see like how we could reconfigure the pieces to see how close we could pass. And I don't remember on our previous episode if we gave kind of our guesses for our scores, but I had always thought I was kind of in the 80 range. Was about, I think, like if I was just like lying to myself a little bit, I thought I could get up to like an 82 maybe. Um, and but I just really felt like I was around an 80, which is still kind of far away, right? But I wasn't even close to an 80. So that's that's kind of the main thing is the biggest surprise was how far away that I was. And I'll just reveal my overall score was a 71. And that was kind of embarrassing to hear in the moment. We get a phone call, and they ripped the Band-Aid for me, which was nice. They just said this, overall was a 71, and then kind of went into the areas. And that was disappointing at first. And I don't mean that it's not embarrassing in the sense of like, a 71 is a respectable score on what is tantamount to the most difficult beer exam known to humans. So I'm proud of that. But it's not where I thought that I was. And so there's been a lot of self-reflection going on. And so we both spent a lot of time just kind of like coming to terms with the phone call and the score that we got. And like Scott said at the beginning of the episode, the different stages of grief about your score. And in full disclosure, too, we even requested another meeting with the directors of the program to just try to understand a little bit more of the feedback. Because at the end of all the phone calls, after everybody gets their score, um, should they choose to get a phone call, wink, wink, they they email you the full feedback, which is kind of compiled feedback from the graders. So you get a little paragraph about pretty much every question on the exam, with a little bit of stuff that you could improve on or things that you missed. And some of it was a little confusing to us, but a lot of it was also pretty helpful, and kind of jump started or like kicked in memory, that I hadn't really thought about for a while, from the exam. So yeah, it was like, I don't want to act all like morose and sad about it. It's not the score that I thought that I would get, and it's not the score obviously that I wanted. But there's a lot to learn from that score, and really the task now is to figure out how to make up such a big gap. And I'll let Scott kind of talk about his experience getting his phone call and anything he wants to say about his score. But you also get a little bit of a breakdown in your knowledge areas. So the 5 categories are pretty similar on most levels of the Cicerone exam, and you get a score for like each knowledge area. So keeping and serving, beer styles, ingredients and process, all those things. And so I'll let Scott talk about overall stuff for him, but our knowledge area scores kind of tracked with where we thought we were, I think, too. So
Yeah, so I remember the day that we were getting the call, and kind of like you, I thought there was, and I believe this was what I said, on the episode we did right after we took the exam. I thought there was like a sliver of a chance that I could actually pass. I thought maybe realistically I was kind of in like the 82, 83 range, and believe I said I would have been, and I told a lot of people, I said I would have been pretty shocked if I didn't, break 80. And and I think for both of us, the ultimate goal, at the very least, was just to feel like we were within striking distance for the second attempt if we had to do it. And then I remember I got asked right before the phone call. My spouse said, what is really worst case scenario? And I said, really, like, I would just not breaking 80. And Dan, I think a common question that gets asked on the phone call is, how do you think you did? And I didn't really say one way or the other. I just said, the one thing I know is that Chris and I put a lot into this, and we did a lot of studying, and I'm not sure how much more I could have realistically, done. And at that point, I can be happy with wherever it lands, because I didn't cheat the process. I put in a ton of work, ton of time, ton of resources, and and Dan, they said that's a commendable kind of perspective to take. And Dan said 79, and I just was stunned for a second. Was telling people about the score, and you're definitely telling people who've taken the exam before, passed the exam before, and you're trying to hear that 79 is a really good score, the first time around, but you wanted it. I just thought, gosh, and then I did exactly what you were talking about. I went back and crunched the numbers, and I think it was like I needed like another half point, maybe, for that, to kind of maybe get it rounded up to an 80 potentially. I think it was like in the 79.2 or 0.3 or something. And so just, looking through the feedback, you're just kind of looking through, where could I have just picked up half a point just to be, in that range. But, thankfully had a lot of really good things to kind of take away. with my feedback, did really well in the tasting. That was definitely the best of the kind of three major sections, the orals, essays, and, tasting. I got an 86 on the tasting, which was great. But yeah, got, I think it was 78 for essays, and yeah, 78 for the written, and then 79 for the oral exam. And just yeah, I mean, Dan said, I'm on the phone, I think he said, I'm pretty sure what knowledge area you didn't do super well in, and he said he could kind of tell that I was not thinking it was it was going super great during the exam, and and that was keeping and serving. It was my lowest score by far. I got a 59 on that section alone. Pairing was 82, brewing was 83, flavor was 86, and styles was 86. So did really solid through the rest of it. But even when I told people who had taken the exam before, and I said, yeah, keeping and serving was my lowest, and they were most people who I mentioned that to, taken it before, and even the ones who've passed, they said, oh yeah, first time that was my lowest one. And I said, well, I got, this was kind of the breakdown, and they were like, oh, okay, well, like, it wasn't that low. They're like, it wasn't like 59. So, but then again, like, you're going through, you're feeling all of the feelings, and you're disappointed, and you're realizing that you have another 10 months that you've got to study, and you're thinking about all the time and the resources that you have to put into it. But the thing I kind of came away from that with was that just the path is very clear. Did a lot of things right that worked out really well on the exam, and even though keeping and serving was really low, there's tons of places in that exam where it is possible to get 100. It's really probably the only section where you can, if you really just do the right things, you can get a few of those. And many people have told us that that's one of the keys to being able to, because there's just not really a lot of places where you can give yourself a huge cushion. I think even for I think on just even any general section on both on the written or on the orals, didn't break 90 on any of the sections, kind of whether it was styles, brewing, pairing. I mean, I got the highest I got for individual section for orals was 88, but there's just not there's not a ton of places where you can just do so well that you've just got this huge cushion. And I think it reminded us of a piece of advice we had kind of heard early on about the exam, and it was just Brian Reed was just like, you can't suck you can't suck at anything. And in the moment we're kind of like, well, yeah, whatever. And it's like, oh, okay, that's kind of what he meant, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, there are more. One of my biggest kind of misinterpretations, I think, after the fact was I sort of treated the master exam like it was just 2 days of the advanced exam. And I even talked to you about that a little bit, that I thought it was a little bit more about a marathon than a sprint. And on my advanced exam, like I bombed an essay and didn't do well on some other sections, but it felt like there were some places to hide, kind of like if you got a really good score on something else. And I think that the difference actually is there's a real plateau to the higher scores for everything on the master exam. And so, you said you got an 88 on one of the orals. I think I got an 87 on a couple of them. Those were high points. And it really is like, I think once you crack 85, it's very difficult to get a higher score than that on a
yeah,
lot of stuff. You know what I mean? And so
yeah,
I think that's a little bit more what Brian means with you can't suck at anything, because you really kind of like all the things you felt like you really killed. You're not talking about like 95s on a beer style oral exam. They're going to find some places to take some points from you
Yeah.
on that. It really feels like. But so to your point on keeping and serving, when the answer is just, did you get the math right on how to build out this draft system? You can get 100 on that. And so that's certainly one of the things that we'll look to do going forward, because that was my lowest subject area score as well, was keeping and serving, which is not
Yeah.
I had sort of my two lowest scoring subject areas were keeping and serving, and then ingredients and process. And ingredients and process is something I know about myself. Like I have a hard time recalling a lot of the specifics of intricate details of the brewing process at an advanced and master level. And so that didn't surprise me as much as keeping and serving, which I thought I had a pretty good handle on. And so it's two different stories, right? One is just get better at the knowledge area for ingredients and process. And then for keeping and serving, it's, you just got to make sure you're prepared for anything, because we certainly were not. In that respect, whether it was nerves or just the specific oral exam question that we got, whatever it might be. But yeah, I think a good takeaway from your score too is you do have a place to zero in on, in a sense, which is kind of nice, right? Like we didn't even want to hear like the good things after hearing some of these scores, but that's decent to know, like, okay, if I knock keeping and serving out of the park and get a little bit better on some of these other things, then you have a really good shot at passing next time.
Yeah, and I think the other thing we definitely realized, especially after hearing our feedback, is that the depth of knowledge is definitely different, from advanced, but you do have to go slightly further in terms of depth of knowledge, but the kind of the time constraint and the sort of vice grip that acts as is really what intensifies. I think from what I recall, when we had our advanced exams, I think we both had somewhere in like the realm of like 40 minutes to an hour left, of leftover time for our essay portion. And, basically, if you're not just reading a question and starting to get like active recall right away, you're pretty much on the back foot at that point. And, I think we both had places where we were like, this, maybe had a little bit to do with maybe a slight, lack of knowledge in the area, but it was really under the time constraint. It's not that, we're, not super great, at some of these sections or with some of these things, but, there's definitely a good portion of it is, for anybody out there who thinks like, oh, like this is, everybody's score is just kind of, indicative of like their level of knowledge. I think that's pretty false. I think it's more about being able to do it within the confines of the exam and what that asks of you. And so, I think there's definitely part of it where it's like you really got to have a solid. Well, not only you have to have a solid strategy, but it also has to kind of work out, right? Like we kind of had, a strategy going in to do, draft math stuff and try and get that stuff done really quickly. But when that stuff takes, longer than it's even supposed to, you're supposed to probably be taking around, 20, 22 minutes per essay. And when it takes you 25, 30, you're just in big trouble. And that, that definitely showed itself on, with my other keeping and serving. I didn't do extremely well on one of the draft math ones, but one of my other keeping and serving ones was my lowest. I think it was like a 43, or something like that. And that was just part of it was you're just trying to give them as many places to give you points as possible. You don't end up having the time that you think you were going to have, and you're just really trying to, scramble as much as you can. That was definitely more the case for me on day one. Day two, I felt like I had a little bit, better of a handle on it. Even had maybe, a minute and a half, 2 minutes left at the end to just kind of look over, some stuff on day two. But I mean, day one, it was just a mad dash.
Yeah, and it's not just the keeping and serving essays. If you end up spending too much time on any essay,
Yeah.
then more time than you wanted, it bleeds into your ability to get a higher score on other stuff too, right? And I
Yeah.
think one of the best examples of that is food and beer pairing, which is one of our favorite things. We've had this channel and we've gone through a ton of beer and food pairing ideas, and I think that some of them, they're not all winners, but we get as creative as we can. I think we've discovered a lot of things about food and beer pairing that is really good for the exam. But then you're sitting at the exam and all of a sudden you're running out of time and you just don't have the time to be as creative as you wanted to. And so, despite my beer and food pairing, I got a 79 overall in that subject area. That's not like atrocious, but like that's my best area in a lot of ways. And I robbed myself of being able to get a much higher score there. And so, yeah, the time management bleeds all over the place, and that's certainly something that is, a lot of it is the nerves of taking the exam. I underestimated a little bit. Like I didn't feel like nervous, like I was going to fail during the exam, but there was like a frenetic pace to some of it that I didn't really have good control over. And like you said, on one of the days of the essays, I mean, I was just going back and trying to get anything down on the page for some of the subpoints for some of the questions. And right when we finished, I was like, oh, okay, good. I answered everything. I think, it's not going to look pretty, but I got a lot of stuff down on the page and we should be okay. And then you get your feedback and it's like, oh, that went way differently than I thought. I must have just sounded like a ridiculous person as the graders were reading some of that. And so I do think that that's the biggest difference between the advanced level and the master level is you really don't have time to think on the master exam, to really think, to sit to just take a beat and be like, okay, how do I really need to approach this? Or, what is the answer to this question, whether it's oral exams or essays? In really, the task at hand is to be able to recall the answer as quickly as possible. And so that's just the difference between, kind of book learning and kind of like, as you said, not a whole lot of the subject matter felt out of our league, but the rapidity with which I could get it on the page or say it out loud was definitely out of my league. So I need to it has to be more second nature than just, I know this. And I think that is valuable for some sections of the exam, right? Like to be able to answer a single essay question in about 22 minutes on a topic and get as granular as you can. That's like a good measure of a master Cicerone, I think. I'm a little bit perturbed by the time constraints on like draft system troubleshooting, because I don't think like whether you can fix a draft system in 15 minutes versus 10 minutes is the measure of a master Cicerone. So some of that's kind of silly to me. It's like, oh, you didn't get to everything, and it's like, well, if I ran my own bar, I would be able to fix this problem. And in 10 minutes is not the judge of whether or not that's appropriate. So, allow me my little complaint there, that I have some philosophical disagreements with some of the time stuff. But I think overall it makes a lot of sense that, it's not an open book test. It's not infinite time. You have to know some of these things and be able to recall them as if you were just asked the question on the street. You don't have time to drudge up all the things that you learned. They need to be at the ready.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've definitely, we definitely talked about, some of the places where we, feel like we really need, a lot of improvement. But, what did you take away? I talked about my tasting score. Is there, are there any good like positives that took away from your exam experience, score, feedback, anything like that?
Yeah, well, just in terms of score, just raw score, my highest knowledge area was beer styles. I got an 81 on beer styles. Um, and not getting that up to sort of like the 85 range is it had a lot to do with a bunch of different things. One of them was time. There are a couple of style essays, for example, that are a lot more time intensive than you might think. You're not just breaking down one beer style, but they're asking you to compare multiple commercial examples of this beer style and say what's unique about them. And you have to give full flavor breakdowns of multiple beers. And it's just very, very time consuming. So I think I missed, a point here or there just for time and time management reasons. But this is the thing that's kind of scary. So that's my best knowledge area score. But if you've gotten advice, if anyone out there is like as deep into this as we are, and you talk to Master Cicerones that took the test multiple times, like the number one thing that they messed up their first time was vital statistics on beer styles and commercial examples. And so we made sure not to forfeit a lot of points there, and we did a lot of work on that. And I still missed apparently a couple of vital statistics ranges here and there by like a one SRM or whatever it might be. I didn't lose like a earth-shattering amount of points. But the reason it's scary is because like if that's the thing that most people have to loop back and work on, like I have to go do all the hard stuff now. I have to go, I have to learn more of the stuff that they did well the first time. So, but that's my biggest just like raw score takeaway is or positive is beer styles, and that's normally kind of a strength of mine. So I'll be looking to I think one cautionary tale on that is that doesn't mean stop studying beer styles, because some of the best advice that we got late breaking and studying was that you learn so much about all the knowledge areas through beer styles that I'll be looking to improve that score as well. It's not just the stuff that I did the worst on. And then I really just thought I'm in this zone where I'm trying to attribute what I can to nerves and time management during the exam, but also being honest with myself and trying to figure out exactly where I need to improve subject matter wise. And I really don't think, despite my score being 14 percentage points away from passing, I don't feel like the exam's out of my league. That's just kind of, I that took some convincing, because that's a big gap to me. That's a much bigger gap than I wanted, anticipated, all of the above. But yeah, now I'm just in the wake of it and going over the feedback and digesting everything. It's like, okay, none of this is really out of my league. It really is a combination of making sure all of this is second nature and then performance on game day. Because there were some silly things that happened on game day. Like since my advanced exam, I somehow, after struggling with it for years, became the acetaldehyde whisperer.
Yeah.
And then I missed it on the frickin' exam, on the frickin' master exam. And so it's just like, you're either in your head or thinking about other things, and the conditions are weird, and you're just going for this like life altering certification, and there's the weight of it there. So inexplicable things happen is what I'm trying to get at. You're gonna miss a couple of things that you have no business missing. But the other just kind of positive surprise, I think, is there are some spots on the exam where they're quite generous about the grading. And so, and this doesn't give anything away about the answers, but my favorite example of this is I only the beer style panel, where you just get 7 beers and you have to guess the style. You don't get any suggestions on what the style may be, no answer bank. You just, what style of beer is this? I only got 1 on the nose, 1 out of 7. But I got 70 on that panel. And so it's a little bit of a chimera exactly how they grade that to us, but you get a lot of credit for being close, or maybe they picked a style that has some crossover or whatever it might be. And so I think I learned not to we've already been studying in earnest again. I've learned to not beat myself up over missing a beer style, and rather think about, okay, how can I get as close or better on evaluating some of these. The other example is the flavor compounds tasting panel, which is there's this panel on the master exam that's 4 samples of beer. It's just a neutral beer, whatever it is, and they've spiked it with each one with a different flavor compound. But the trick is it's a flavor compound that is not on the syllabus. And so there are about 40 flavor compounds on the syllabus. There are about 29 listed on the tasting exam format portion of it, but in the ingredients or in a beer flavor and evaluation section, they list some extra ones that they're not going to test you on flavor wise. But the point is, these are compounds that aren't listed on the syllabus, and you get the bulk of the credit for describing the compound accurately, and then the little 5% if you name the specific compound. And I felt so far off. Like I was only remotely close on one of them, I think, one of the 4, and the other 3 I just felt totally lost. And when they revealed those compounds to us, I still didn't feel particularly close. And I didn't get a good score, but I got like a 60 or whatever it was, which is like, okay, so the lesson is get as much information as you can on the page, make sure you're answering everything, and I really took to heart that I think in the vast majority of cases, the graders are looking for places to award you points. And it only plateaus once you get up into that 85 to 90 area. Then they're like not doing you any favors. They're done doing you favors if you get that good of a score. But so those are my two main positives. I did pretty well on beer styles, and I had a lot of coming to terms with moving forward in some other sections too. What about positives for you?
Yeah, outside of the of the tasting exam, being very happy with that. Styles went really well. Again, like you said, the advice that we got, I think that definitely played a big part in doing well there. Doing well in the written section for flavor. Getting a 88 on that written section, and then getting I think that was my highest essay score, was one of the kind of flavor compound essays, and I got a 95 on that particular question. So that was definitely my highest. I had only gotten, I think I got like 2 or 3, I think 3 essays in the 90s, and then I think I had 2 oral exams that were in the 90s. But even then, like you said, I thought I just like destroyed that. Like I was just like, there's no way I'm not above 95. And I didn't get a 95 on any oral exams. Definitely got, I think 93 was the highest I got on an oral exam. So yeah, they don't really take you literally have to probably fill out the entire rubric just in spades to do that well. I think the other thing too is to me it was like it's about going into it and just needing more systems in place, when especially for things that I think the biggest mistake I made was kind of half jokingly saying, oh, troubleshooting draft systems, like who's gonna let me practice doing that? Like who's gonna let me screw something up, and then somebody who doesn't really know what they're doing, and after looking at how I did, thank God nobody let me do that and then try and fix it. That's not something I should have been doing. But I should have had some sort of just some sort of like step by step walk into the room, when you walk into a room and you just don't even notice that the keg's empty, like that means you just didn't even have any sort of inkling of a system. And so I think that's something we've both definitely said that we want to have, whether it's particular, essay types that seem to come up, and particular oral exams or things of that nature. We really want to go in and, yeah, maybe we've never seen that, whatever it is. Maybe it's that piece of equipment or whatever it is, but we're still just not going to look at something. And then, because like for one of the troubleshooting, I just got totally fixated on one thing, and I still, like you said, speaking of generosity, I mean, I thought I should have gotten a much lower score than I was given in that particular oral exam. Um, so, I think just having systems for essays, just having a good idea of timing, some little things about how we can practice that are closer to exam, conditions. I think those are things that we've already put into place for tasting stuff. But really just going in and just thinking, because like you said, like there wasn't anything that they asked us where we were just like totally clueless, like we had never heard of something before or seen something before. But it was, do you have a system in place where even if you maybe if you don't do that all the time, at least you're still going to make sure you're going to just touch on everything? Because what we realized is that if they're trying to award you points, then the best way to just not do well is to just leave them no recourse except to not award you any points. And also I think just in other spots there's there a little bit more maybe structure in some cases, where understanding that maybe while I do want to, because there was one particular part of the exam where I was asked about a particular compound in a sample, and I just felt like I just the little Bill Simpson, Dr. Bill Simpson in my head just said, oh yeah, that's this particular compound, and I just kind of snapped it off and was super confident because I just felt like I was going with my gut, and I just was something I had never really, I mean, after taking Aroxa, not a compound I was ever really confused with, and got it wrong for the first time. I couldn't, like you said, with acetaldehyde, I mean, it was ethyl butyrate, and I just don't really get that one wrong very often. And so just wishing I would have taken a beat, like I had plenty of time left, there was no rush, like, just, you've got a couple of minutes, like just go back and just double check, like why not? So, but I think it'll be, I think the big thing too is we're definitely, we definitely understand now that, the exam starts whether you're kind of mentally ready or not. And I'd rather not, kind of snap out of it, 1.5 oral exams into it. I'd rather just, even though it wasn't, my favorite oral exam to begin with, I'd still just like to kind of feel like I'm, just kind of starting at, at full speed, rather than just kind of like, just kind of like wading my way through and then just kind of realizing like, oh my gosh, like you have to get your shit together, because this isn't going super great. Yeah, I think that's going to be the biggest change for this next time. Really honing in on 2-3 areas of focus that I'll just have to just totally immerse myself in. It's already been like draft quality manuals in my hands every day, all kinds of stuff, draft math, all that stuff is happening on a regular basis. But like you said, then just because, one thing we haven't, I think, mentioned is kind of the sophomore slump that a lot of people have. People will do super well for a first time test taker, 81, we've heard of people do it, getting like 83 and a half, getting really close. And then they'll come back in, they'll kind of have their acceptance speech ready, and then they get the call, and then they're just like, yeah, you did a couple points worse than last time, and then you're just kind of like, what happened? And it's not just guaranteed that you don't get to keep your scores from the last time. You've got to do everything all over again to the level that they're asking you. And Yeah, definitely don't want to do that. And and I know another thing we talked about, you talking about um, the kind of 14-point gap. I think a great thing that you heard was that while that seems like a long way, the sort of like the confines of the exam and the structure of the exam, it can have that cascading effect where it leads to something like that. But once you start to kind of overcome that and you actually, do get those questions done in the amount of time you want and do save yourself time, it can be like a snowball effect in the other direction. Where it's not just this, everything's going downhill and the snowball gets bigger, but, also if you're pushing it up the hill, that eventually you're getting over the hill, and then all of a sudden things are happening really, really well in your favor, at a even, kind of more frenetic pace in a positive direction. So, I'm hoping that that works out for both of us, next year. There was part of me when I first started this journey, I was like, I think I could take this 4 or 5 times if I had to. Like, I don't see it, and now I'm like, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah,
We'll see about that. I don't know. What are your feelings about that?
I feel very similarly. Like, you hear about people deciding not to take the Master Cicerone exam again, no matter how many times they took it previously. And 2 years ago, I thought I thought that was wild. Like, to be that close and to not take it again, or to commit to this being your last time or whatever it is. And I just couldn't be further from that thought now. I actually understand it a little bit more, and it's like, how much can you invest in this? It takes up so much of your life. It's the payoff is still to be determined in a lot of ways. And I just think I get it, and I'm ready. Like, I'm motivated and I'm ready to tackle it again. If I feel like I solved some of the issues that I had with my first approach and fall substantially short again, I won't put it out of the realm of possibility that I'll be like, maybe this isn't for me. Um, but I think, Dan, one of the new program directors, has also just sort of said there's kind of a, you can call it obsessive, you can call it addictive, whatever kind of personality trait you want to call it. There's an element of focus that is necessary to achieve this goal, and they're not just trying to hand it out like candy either. So I know that it's supposed to be difficult. Maybe even there are a couple of hurdles that are like unnecessary hurdles, and I'm not even that mad about that. It's just, so I feel similarly. I was like, yeah, I could take this a bunch of times and be fine. And I am not falling prey to any like third time's a charm myth or whatever like that. Like, I definitely just want to pass it on attempt 2 and be done with it. But I can't promise how I'll feel if I don't pass the second time. But we also, when we were waiting for our scores for this first attempt, you had a really good kind of counseling moment where you were just like, well, nope, let's not just think about the negative. Let's try to manifest, positive thoughts about some of these scores and what we could get. And certainly you're let down when you don't reach the goal of that positive thinking. But I think if we imbue the positive thinking for attempt number 2 with some extra hard work, then we're going to be okay. And so I'm feeling okay about that. It's not a bummer to have failed. It is a bummer to be as far away from passing as I am. But that's a little bit motivating too. I'd like to see if someone can make up that kind of gap in 1 year. So that's the move. And I think a little bit of it, there's some intangibles, right, to attempt 2. And one of them is just like, you can't really explain it, but there's obviously a comfort level with taking the exam. So there aren't really all that many secrets about the format of the exam. But attempt two, I'm not going to be as nervous for the first Master Cicerone thing I've ever done, which was the worst Master Cicerone thing I've ever done on attempt one. You're not as intimidated by the proctors or the environment or feeling like you shouldn't be there or imposter syndrome type stuff. And so those are things that you can't put a score to, but on attempt two, those aren't going to cascade into bigger problems like you had said. And so the real task is fixing the more tangible things, and then those intangibles just become the bump that help get you over the hump. And the main tangible thing for me is the time management. That is what I'm going to be working on, and it's one very simple thing and one more difficult thing. The simple thing is just we practiced a lot with our own timers. And it might sound silly, but like you go to the exam, you don't get your own timer. They're going to call out time. Or you have to like go get up and look at a clock during a 3-hour essay session, whatever it might be. And so just a little bit more like natural understanding of the time constraints, I think is going to help a lot. So we've already started practicing without timers. We have someone calling time for us about halfway through, etc. And then the other thing is to bring watch so that we can track the time a little bit better. And while we did practice pretty much all of our tasting with the time constraints that are on the exam and the oral exams, actually, I did not do all that much essay practice under time constraints. And I gotta definitely put myself under even more stringent time constraints with my essay practice. So, if I can write a passing essay answer to a food and beer pairing essay in 18 minutes, then 22 minutes is going to feel like a luxury on the exam. And that's kind of where I want to be. And I did practice, some essays. A lot of it was kind of late in the game for attempt one, and I think that's the biggest thing that I need to overcome is a lot more essay practice with time constraints, real strict ones, and make it feel like 22 minutes is all the time in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, I'll definitely be doing more of that as well. Already doing that, and just putting myself to to a timer and just seeing how quickly I can feel like I can get it. Because that's what you said. Just is there's a lot to that it's writing something that's passing because it is so hard to get to the mid to upper 90s. It's kind of about knowing when you've hit somewhere between 85 and 90 and just thinking, I got to go and spend time doing it somewhere, doing this somewhere else because you might spend a lot of time and, someone who we knew, who did really well the first time, they did super well on an essay. They wrote a ton so that they could get, said they were trying to get 100, and then they left and had to leave basically an entire essay blank.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows how much extra time you spent to get 5 points when you could have gotten 50 points. Even if it's only 50 out of 100, that's, you're leaving 10 times the amount of points on the table. So, yeah, there really is just, you kind of have to start getting this sense of, okay, I've just got to be done with this, and there's just not going to be any time to go back. And I think that's the another thing too that I think we heard from maybe even more than one person was, one of the things that I think a strategy that we and I certainly employed it at one point on one of the essays was kind of didn't think about the answer kind of didn't come to me right away, and so I thought, okay, I better not start with that question. But then something would come to me, and so then I'd write it, and I'd go back and I would write let's just say it's a beer I think would go good with a dish or something. And so
Mm-hmm.
I thought of the commercial example, I thought of the name or whatever, but you think, oh, I'll just come back to that, then all of a sudden you don't have any time and you don't get back to it. And so it's like just being able to go through and do an entire one, be done with it, and doing them in the right order. There's just so many of these little intricacies that we learned that hopefully will just lead to vastly improved scores for next year. And and also speaking of that, another thing we've kind of talked about, we've been doing this, consistently. This is, if you talk like this plus all of the episodes we did on, Instagram, I think this is like episode like 65 or something, or 66, something like that. We did quite a, we're basically about at the, like, we've done half of it on YouTube and half of it on Instagram, and it's pretty much been the same format besides these, these Master Cicerone exam kind of breakdowns. And it's really been, pick a commercial example, kind of work through all the different, parts of it, from a sensory standpoint, process and ingredients, and then beer and food pairing. And we're definitely going to be going forward. We'll still keep styles, in the mix. Like we've said, we think it's really important, but we've also realized that we probably need to start using the channel for some other topics and other like study areas. And we've been kind of talking about, okay, what are some things where, we want to bring some subjects and we really want to try and talk through them and kind of break them down and really get a chance to kind of present on them. So that's one change that'll be happening, moving forward. We'll still pepper in some styles here and there, but we'll be touching on keeping and serving stuff and flavor compounds and a lot of processed stuff. So hopefully that's something you all will enjoy. It's very, a la False Bottom Girls, use the channel to, we haven't been shy about saying we've been using, the channel to help study, and we're just thinking we need to expand that a little bit, open that up to some more knowledge areas. And so I think for the next episode, I think we're going to start with pasteurization is going to be the first subject, and then that'll have sort of a natural kind of progression into the next one that Chris will have on deck after that. But we'll confirm what that is. I'll just make sure that's what we're going to go with. But next week we're going to be talking about pasteurization. So I'm excited for a little bit of a switch up here.
Yeah, it'll be great. I mean, we use the channel selfishly for our own study reasons, and we'll continue to do so. And that next modus operandi is kind of going, in a way, point by point on the syllabus for the Master Cicerone exam. And we'll go out of order. Like, we're going to pick some things that we're interested in, or honestly, pick some things we're not interested in that we need to improve on. And at the end of, as we approach the 2025 Master Cicerone exam, hopefully you have a big cache of videos that are covering a ton of different areas of the Master Cicerone syllabus, and it's everything from keeping and serving to beer styles and beer and food pairing and all the above.
Excellent. Yeah, so we will see you guys next time. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to follow us on Instagram. We're at The Beer Enthusiast. Chris is The Fresh Beer Enthusiast. I'm Vintage Beer Enthusiast on Instagram. If you have any questions, or if you have any topics that you're particularly interested in, if we've got some in the pipeline and we're seeing some interest that lines up, we can certainly move stuff up the queue. If anybody's super interested in anything. So yeah, feel free to reach out to us on social media and let us know. And thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Cheers, everybody.